My name is Claire Roth. For 7 years, I ran the backbone of my family's grocery empire. I negotiated every deal, kept every store stocked, and made them millions. But the day I questioned a single expense, my own father told me I didn't belong. And that's when I knew loyalty only goes one way in the Martin family. They had no idea I was the one holding all the power. Where are you watching this video from? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. You know that sinking feeling when something you've nurtured starts slipping through your fingers? That was me last Thursday, standing under flickering fluorescent lights in the back office of Martin & Sons market chain, my family's grocery business. Not glamorous, I know, but this place was my life. I was in front of the whiteboard, my whiteboard covered with routes, supplier names, shipping windows, color-coded delivery zones. I had built that system from scratch. 7 years of perfecting, adjusting, cultivating relationships with over 100 suppliers. I could tell you which farm in California had the best organic avocados in spring, and which logistics company could get them to Columbus faster than FedEx. That board was my command center, and now Darren was lounging with his overpriced latte like we were in a cafe instead of at work. Do you even know how much our avocados cost this week? I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. But I was tired. The supplier invoices had just come in and the price had jumped 12%. Not a surprise, California was in drought again. But it needed a strategy, not sarcasm. Darren just grinned from his chair, kicking his feet up on the desk. "Relax, sis," he said, dragging out the word sis like it was a joke. "It's just groceries." My hands curled into fists at my sides. Darren Martin, my younger brother, part-time VP of Vibes, full-time headache. He waltzed into the business last year after selling his app startup, or rather, watching it fail gracefully with a payout from our father. And now he played executive with his custom suits and his complete ignorance of margins, supplier trust, or supply chain disruption. "It's not just groceries," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's perishable inventory with a price spike and a supplier demanding an early renegotiation. If we don't react, we eat the cost or pass it to customers and risk loyalty loss. That avocado," I picked up the sample from the desk, "costs us 92 cents right now. It was 76 last quarter. Multiply that by 20,000 units across 15 stores. Darren blinked. "Okay, so raise prices." "You can't just raise prices in a vacuum. You have to," I stopped, the heat rising in my chest, because right then our father walked in, Harold Martin, founder, patriarch, cold as steel in a snowstorm, still wore his cufflinks from the 70s and expected loyalty without question. His tie was crisp, his expression unreadable. "Enough," he said, one word. That's all it took to freeze the room. I turned to him. "Dad, this matters. Darren doesn't understand the volatility here. If we're not..." "If you don't like how we run things," he interrupted, his voice like ice cracking across a lake, "maybe you don't belong here." Silence. I felt the words hit before I even processed them. I don't belong here. The same man who used to beam when I brought home awards for supply chain innovation in college. The same man who called me my Claire Bear, the numbers queen, when I cut our logistics costs in half during COVID. That man now looked at me like I was the problem. "Understood," I said softly. The room spun just a little as I turned back toward the whiteboard, but I wasn't looking at the data anymore. I was calculating something very different now. Let me know in the comments. What would you do if your own family told you to get out of something you built? Because that was the moment I realized. They might think I'm disposable, but they forgot one thing. I built the list. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the building had that eerie stillness it gets after hours. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, the hum of refrigeration systems drifting in from the warehouse, and the faint scent of citrus cleaner clinging to the air. Everyone else had clocked out. Everyone except me. And Tara. She sat across from me in the logistics office, brow furrowed as she stared at the same spreadsheet I'd taught myself to navigate in my sleep. I had pulled it up to show her how to track supplier fulfillment metrics, on-time performance, damaged goods, invoice discrepancies, that kind of thing. Not exactly thrilling stuff unless you lived and breathed it, which I did. Tara was trying. I gave her that. But I couldn't ignore the tiny, insistent voice in the back of my mind that kept whispering. Why her Tara was Darren's wife. Stylish, polished, not unkind, but always at a slight distance, as though she were mentally recording conversations for playback later. She'd only been hired last week, dropped straight into the logistics team without so much as a group interview. Just Dad says she'll be a great addition, and that was that. Now here she was, fumbling through the numbers while I stayed late on a Thursday to train her. Stress too much, I said gently, watching her navigate the columns with shaky keystrokes. You'll get the hang of it. The system's a beast at first, but once you know what to look for, it tells you everything. Tara offered a tight smile. I just don't want to mess up. Darren said you're the gold standard in ops. I nodded, letting the compliment wash over me like cold rain. Empty, performative, but I appreciated the effort. We ran through a few more exercises, and I even found myself slipping into that old rhythm, explaining the meaning behind each number, what I looked for in a trustworthy supplier, how important the relationships were. The vendors weren't just names on a list to me. I'd spent years building them. Phone calls at 6 a.m. to catch produce brokers before the trucks left Fresno. Negotiations that stretched over months. Birthday cards to the small farm in Idaho that always sent handwritten notes with their potatoes. This isn't just numbers, I said, my voice softer now. It's trust. Every supplier is a relationship I built. Tara glanced up, her eyes briefly meeting mine. For the first time that night, she looked almost uncomfortable. You really care about all of this, don't you? She asked. I do, I said, surprised by the emotion in my voice. Maybe too much sometimes. There was a pause as she saved the spreadsheet and minimized the window. Her phone buzzed. She checked the message, then smiled faintly, more to herself than to me. She stood to gather her things, and I started closing out the system, ready to finally head home. As she zipped up her bag, she muttered, almost under her breath, but not quite. He says thanks for softening her up. I froze. My hands hovered over the keyboard, suddenly unsure what to do. I turned slowly. What? Tara's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, like a deer who realized she'd wandered into a clearing too soon. Then her face reset into polite confusion. What? You said. He says thanks for softening her up. Oh, her laugh was light, too light. It's nothing. Darren just meant you've been really helpful. He thought you might be territorial about logistics, but I told him you've been wonderful. Territorial. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Of course, it's just data. But inside, something shifted, not a crack exactly. More like a hairline fracture. Tara slipped her phone into her purse and offered a cheerful good night. As she left, I sat there in the quiet, watching the screen fade to black. My reflection stared back at me, tired, unsmiling, aware now in a way I hadn't been before. He says thanks for softening her up. That wasn't an offhand joke. That was strategy, and I was the one being softened. I didn't say anything. Not yet. But in that quiet office, under the stale hum of the lights, something new took root in me. I'd always believed that my work would speak for itself. That if I built the business right, built it for them, they would value it. Value me. But maybe, just maybe, I'd been building it for someone else entirely. And maybe it was time I stopped handing out blueprints to people who never planned to give me credit. The next evening, I left my office late again. The building was mostly dark, with only a few emergency lights glowing near the exits. My heels echoed down the hallway, sharp, purposeful, louder than I felt. I passed by Tara's office on my way out. Her door was half open. I wasn't going to stop, but something about her tone made me pause. Yeah, no, she hasn't caught on, Tara was whispering into her phone. She won't fight. She thinks it's still her company. There was a pause, then a quiet laugh. Darren said she's too attached to walk away. Honestly, it's kind of sad. I stood frozen, one hand resting on the edge of the doorframe. My breath caught, but I stayed silent. She's been training me like I'm her protege, Tara continued, almost pitying now. It's like she doesn't realize I'm the one taking her place. Another laugh. I backed away quietly, my chest hollow. The hallway stretched long and unfamiliar as I walked toward the exit. I kept my pace steady, my expression blank. I didn't even grab my coat. I needed air. Outside, the spring night was too warm for April. The breeze should have been calming, but my thoughts tangled into knots. She thinks it's still her company. Was that really how they saw me? Had everything I built, every contract, every negotiation, every sleepless night, been nothing more than a bridge for Tara to walk over? The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to the country club. It wasn't planned. I just drove, my hands on the wheel like they had a mind of their own. I didn't wear anything formal, just a blouse, black slacks, and my old trench coat. But as I walked through the grand archway of the Martin Hills Country Club, heads turned anyway, I found Harold on the back patio. He was seated at his usual table with a scotch in hand, laughing politely with a longtime client, Mr. Lowry, the regional real estate mogul who leased to most of our store locations. "Claire," Harold said, clearly surprised. "Didn't expect to see you here. Can we talk?" I said, not smiling. Lowry looked from me to Harold and raised an eyebrow. Harold gave a quick, tight smile. "Excuse me a moment, Bill." We stepped a few feet away, just far enough for polite distance. I didn't dance around it. "Am I being replaced?" Harold took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the golf course like this conversation was just noise. "Claire," he said, his voice calm, "you're imagining things. I overheard Tara last night. She said I think this is still my company, that I won't fight back, that she's replacing me." He sighed, still not meeting my eyes. "You've been under stress. Darren mentioned you've been a bit tense lately." "Dad, maybe take some time off," he said, voice brisk now. "You've worked hard, no one denies that, but sometimes people outgrow their roles." The glass in his hand clinked softly as he turned back toward the table. That was it, no denial, no reassurance, not even a shred of the father I'd grown up admiring. Just distance, precision, dismissal. "I see," I whispered, even though I didn't. "Not yet." I walked away numb, the sunlight too bright on the marble floors. Everything around me looked warped, like the edges of reality were bending just slightly out of place. As I reached the parking lot, I glanced back once through the glass doors. Harold had already resumed his conversation, laughing at something Lowry said. He looked completely at ease. I, on the other hand, stood in the lot like a stranger. "She thinks it's still her company." That sentence echoed in my head all the way home. They weren't just phasing me out, they were counting on me not to notice. And worse, on me not to fight. My apartment didn't feel like mine that night. It was the same place I'd decorated with care, warm lighting, thrifted art prints, an orchid I somehow hadn't killed. But everything felt off. Like the furniture had shifted half an inch to the left. Like the walls were leaning in, watching. I dropped my coat onto the couch and stood in the middle of the living room, staring at nothing. It wasn't the confrontation with Harold that haunted me most. It was the look on his face, like I was already gone. Like I'd left the building months ago and just hadn't noticed. I poured myself a glass of water, tried to drink it, then set it down untouched. My hands were trembling again. No more, I thought. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't have to. The words settled into my chest like an anchor. No. More. I walked to my hall closet, past the shoes I never wore, past the umbrella that still had the tag on it, and opened the back panel behind the coats. There it was. A dusty storage bin labeled tax docs. Totally unremarkable to anyone else. I pulled it out, sat cross-legged on the floor, and flipped it open. Beneath the decoy folders was what I was really looking for, my old laptop. A silver Dell with a cracked hinge and coffee stains on the charger port. Ugly, loyal, and full of secrets. I carried it to the kitchen, plugged it into the outlet near the toaster, and watched the screen flicker to life. My heart thudded once, hard. The desktop was exactly how I'd left it. Folder after folder, labeled by year, by vendor, by region. Contracts I'd negotiated from scratch with mom-and-pop farms and rising distributors alike. Pricing tiers that I had analyzed in my downtime. Review notes from quarterly audits I'd run in secret because I didn't trust Darren's gut instincts. And then the crown jewel. The master supplier list 130 vendors, not just names and numbers, but history. Notes on each relationship. Shipping anomalies, preferred drivers, peak harvest months, who to call when you need 30,000 pounds of romaine by Friday without breaking the bank, the kind of information no algorithm could replicate, the kind that only comes from years of doing the work, listening, remembering birthdays and baby names and weather patterns in Arkansas. They didn't even know what they didn't know. They thought I was just logistics. They didn't realize I was infrastructure, the foundation. The system behind the system. I sat there for a while, staring at the screen, the glow painting my face in blue light. Then I reached into the drawer by the fridge and pulled out a matte black flash drive. I slid it into the USB port, clicked copy, watched the progress bar tick up, 1%, 7%, 23%. As it moved, so did something inside me. The weight of the betrayal didn't disappear, but it shifted, became something else, something heavier, sharper. A new center of gravity. When the transfer finished, I removed the drive, held it between my fingers, so small, so ordinary looking, so dangerous. I walked to my fireproof safe in the hallway, spun the dial, opened it with the key I kept hidden behind a loose baseboard. Inside were a few documents, an old passport, and now the flash drive. I placed it carefully on top, then shut the door. That wasn't enough. I opened my laptop again and navigated to Liberty Bank's website. They had safety deposit boxes, private vaults, secure access, everything I needed to protect what mattered. I booked a vault appointment for 10 a.m. the next morning. I didn't hesitate, because suddenly I knew exactly what I was protecting. It wasn't just data. It was independence. It was proof. It was power. They thought they could write me out of my own legacy, but they'd forgotten something critical. I built the list. The executive conference room smelled like fresh coffee, lavender sanitizer, and betrayal. It was our quarterly strategy meeting. Though lately, strategy had become a polite term for whatever Harold wanted to announce, and Darren wanted to applaud. I had spent 2 weeks preparing my presentation. A fourth-quarter supply optimization plan that could have saved the company nearly 9% in overhead without cutting a single job. 9%. It had taken sleepless nights, supplier negotiations, a freight cost rebalancing, and 3 revised inventory models. I wore navy. Professional. Clean. I even brought printed handouts, old school but effective, just in case the screens failed. Just in case they finally took me seriously. Jay was already there, my cousin, logistics head, and the only person in that room who actually knew what supply chain meant. He gave me a small nod when I walked in, the kind we used to exchange during budgeting wars. Tara sat beside Darren at the far end of the table, tapping something into her iPad, her hair perfectly curled, her nails red and glossy against the stylus. Darren wore a smug smile that had become his default lately, like he was waiting for me to trip over my own shoelaces so he could laugh first. Harold stood at the head of the table, hands clasped, eyes on the screen. "Claire," he said when I reached the front, "you won't need the slides today." I paused, remote still in hand. "Excuse me." He glanced at the others, then back at me. "There's been a change. Tara will be handling supply from now on." The room went still. I blinked. "What do you mean, handling supply?" Harold's voice remained calm. "Effective immediately, Tara is stepping into your role. You'll no longer be involved in supplier management." I stared at him. I built the supplier system. Every relationship, every contract. "Yes," he said evenly. "And now that structure is in place, we can move forward." "Without me," he nodded once. "You have 5 minutes to pack your things and disappear forever." The words hit the room like shattered glass. There was a sharp inhale from someone, maybe Jay. I couldn't tell. Blood was pounding in my ears. Time slowed. Darren chuckled. Actually chuckled. "I guess the boardroom just got a whole lot quieter," he said. No one else laughed. Tara kept her eyes down. I looked at my father. "Is this a joke?" Harold sipped his coffee. "Claire, take the exit you've been building toward. Go do something else with your time. Maybe take a vacation. Reflect." "Reflect," I repeated. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the most generous thing a family can do is let go." I stared at him, at Darren, at Tara. They weren't expecting a fight. They were expecting the collapse, the stunned silence, the wounded exit. And for a moment, I gave it to them. I closed the binder. Slowly. My hands didn't shake. Not now. I looked down at the cover. My supplier list summary, annotated in red pen, months of work, and pulled it close to my chest. Then I straightened. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I walked out. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed overhead as I moved past familiar doors. Legal, payroll, HR, like a woman in a dream she'd seen coming but couldn't stop. At the end of the corridor, I paused. I turned back once. Through the glass wall, I saw them leaning in toward each other again. Darren was laughing at something on his phone. Harold stood, already onto the next agenda item. Tara was adjusting her necklace. They didn't see me. They never had. And yet there I was, leaving a building whose foundation I had built, carrying the one thing none of them truly understood, my work, my legacy, my list. I didn't know where this was headed yet. Not exactly. But as I stepped into the elevator and let the doors slide shut, one thought rose through the static. They just made the worst mistake of their lives. And they didn't even know it yet. Back in my office, the silence felt surgical. This space had been mine for years, warm, organized, humming with energy and motion. The shelves were still lined with binders labeled in my own handwriting, each one a different quarter, a different battle won. The bulletin board still held thank you notes from regional store managers, hand-drawn delivery maps, even a crumpled photo of our first warehouse team post-pandemic. Now it was just another room waiting to be emptied. I reached for the nearest box. Standard corrugated cardboard. Unassuming. I started with the framed photo on my desk, me and Jay at our first vendor expo in Chicago, both of us grinning, faces flushed from standing under fluorescent lights for 14 hours. I placed it carefully inside, followed by a stack of notebooks, a ceramic paperweight shaped like a peach, a supplier gift from Georgia, and my mug that read, "I track deliveries in my sleep." I packed in quiet, deliberate movements. No rush, no drama, just the sound of tape unspooling and files sliding into place. They thought I would leave in pieces. But what they didn't know was that I'd already done my grieving. Not today, weeks ago. The moment Tara whispered, "She won't fight." That was the moment I stopped being afraid to lose what they thought they could take. My door creaked open behind me. I turned. Jay stood there, hesitant, holding a reusable coffee cup still in his button-down from the meeting. He didn't speak at first. Just took in the scene, the boxes, the half-empty shelves, my coat folded neatly over the chair. "They're pushing you out," he said finally. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Jay set the coffee on the edge of my desk and walked a little farther in. "Did you know?" "Not exactly," I said, "but I knew something was coming." He exhaled through his nose, the way he always did when trying not to explode. "This place doesn't work without you." "I'll work," I said, lifting a stack of vendor reports. "Just badly." Jay gave a short, humorless laugh. I sat down on the corner of my desk and looked at him. "How long have you known?" He shrugged, eyes dark. "There were signs. But when Darren started asking about root load balances last week like he suddenly cared, I figured they were moving pieces. And you didn't warn me." "I didn't think they'd be this stupid," he said, voice tight. "I thought maybe, reshuffling, not exile." We stood in silence for a beat. He picked up one of my folders, thumbed the edge, then looked me dead in the eyes. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." That was true. And not, I didn't know how yet, but I knew what. Jay studied my face, then nodded like he'd seen something settle behind my eyes. "You're not going alone," he said. The words hung in the air like they didn't quite believe themselves yet, but he did. I blinked. "Jay, I'm serious." He crossed his arms. "This company doesn't exist without what you built. They think they can replace you with Tara because she wears heels and nods at PowerPoints. But logistics isn't just code and shipping tables. It's people. You built those bridges." He motioned toward my boxes. "If you walk out of here today, I walk too." My throat tightened. "You don't owe me that," I whispered. He raised an eyebrow. "You kept this place from collapsing during COVID while Darren was still learning how to open PDFs. You carried our whole fleet through 3 price surges and a national shortage. You do the work. You care about the people. That's rare, Claire." He leaned in slightly. "People follow that." I didn't respond right away. Just looked at him, this cousin I had grown up with, who used to steal my yogurt in the lunchroom and now stood in front of me, pledging something that felt bigger than loyalty. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to promise revenge. He just needed to show up. "I'm not going to forget this," I said. Jay smirked. "Good, because I'm not carrying these boxes by myself." He grabbed 2 off the desk and headed toward the door. I took a deep breath. Not because I was scared anymore, but because I could feel something shifting in the air, not a storm. A beginning. They told me I had 5 minutes to disappear, but I wasn't disappearing, I was just changing lanes. I thought I would walk out alone. That's how this usually goes, right? The woman packs her boxes. Security watches her like she's about to steal office supplies. Everyone pretends they didn't hear, but this wasn't that. Jay walked beside me, carrying 2 of my boxes like he had nothing better to do, like we were just stepping out for lunch. I held the binder of supplier plans tight against my chest. The one thing they didn't have the sense to erase. As we turned the corner from my office, I expected emptiness. Instead, I found people huddled near the break room at first. Then along the hallway, warehouse clerks, assistant managers, a few cashiers still in uniform, even a couple of delivery drivers. Some with their arms crossed, others holding clipboards awkwardly like they weren't sure what to do with their hands. No one spoke. They just looked at me. I slowed without meaning to. One of the drivers, Miguel, I think, gave me a nod. Not a big gesture. Just the kind that says, "We see you." Then, quietly, someone stepped out of the break room and fell in behind us. Then another, then 2 more. Until there was this strange, wordless procession walking behind me, down the long corridor toward the loading dock. Jay glanced at me, brows raised. I didn't say anything. My throat was too tight. I passed Karen, the front desk supervisor who used to bring me ginger tea when I worked through lunch. She didn't smile, just joined the line. I passed Ben from Regional Analytics, who I once helped after his dad's accident with a flexible work schedule no one else would approve. He didn't speak either, but he fell in step. It wasn't loud. There were no chants, no drama, just footsteps, and a kind of gravity. By the time we reached the double glass doors to the parking lot, we must have had 24 people behind us. The air outside was warm again, almost too much for spring. The sound of traffic floated from the main road, distant and oblivious. Jay stepped aside to open the trunk of his truck, and I handed him the binder. He placed it in the front seat like it was sacred. I turned then, expecting the crowd to have dispersed. But they hadn't moved. They just stood there, not in protest, not in pity. In solidarity. I blinked back the weight in my chest, tried to find words. Before I could, Jay said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's the reason any of us still had jobs during COVID." That did it. A few people nodded. Someone clapped once awkwardly. Then others joined. Not a raucous round of applause, just a building rhythm of recognition. I looked out at their faces, some I'd mentored, others I barely knew. And still they showed up. They weren't there for a headline. They were there because they remembered. Because I hadn't led from the front of a boardroom. I'd led from the loading dock, the call centers, the vendor floor, the all-hands panic meetings when trucks didn't arrive. And now I wasn't a VP, I wasn't even an employee. But I was still someone worth following. I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I said softly, unsure who I was addressing anymore. All of them, maybe. I opened the passenger door and got in. Jay took the driver's seat, started the engine, but didn't move yet. He looked at me. "You okay?" I nodded, eyes wet but clear. I don't think I've ever been more okay. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the building. I didn't need to, because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I still had, and how far that could take me. The sun was beginning to dip low when we pulled into the parking lot of Jay's place, a modest 2-story house tucked behind a line of sweetgum trees. The truck engine clicked softly as it cooled, and the boxes in the back rustled with the motion of stopping. I had no idea what the next chapter looked like, but I knew this wasn't the end. Jay helped me unload the boxes into his garage for now. "You can use the guest room upstairs," he offered. "Or the office if you want quiet. Stay as long as you need." I nodded, too grateful to say much. The shock hadn't worn off, but under it something steadier was growing. A current. A quiet sort of charge. Then the tires screeched. We both turned as Harold's silver Lexus skidded into the lot like a bat out of hell. Before the engine even stopped, the door flew open. Harold stormed toward us, his face red, lips pulled so tight they barely moved as he barked my name. "Claire." Jay stepped in front of me instinctively, his posture solid. Harold didn't stop. "You walk out with proprietary information you're stealing," he shouted. "You've taken company assets. Don't play dumb." "I packed my personal files," I said calmly, "and my coffee mug." "Don't get clever," he snapped, eyes flicking to Jay. "And you're in this too. You know what she's done." Jay didn't move. "What she's done is keep your business alive for the last 7 years. Harold jabbed a finger toward the truck. "We had reports from 3 stores today, no deliveries confirmed, not one. Drivers walked, inventory gaps, missing handoffs, phones ringing off the hook. His voice cracked with rage. "We've got stores without staff. No tracking data. No vendor contact. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," I said. And that was the truth. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't steal, I just left. And the system left with me. That's what they never understood, what Harold never wanted to admit. The business didn't function because of his name or Darren's suits or boardroom politics. It functioned because I made it function. Because I knew who to call when the trucks were late. Who needed net 15 instead of net 30. Who would pick up at 3 a.m. if there was a snow delay in Scranton. Harold's chest heaved. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. He turned to Jay. "And if you're helping her, you'll be named in the lawsuit too." Jay didn't flinch. "Do what you need to do, Uncle Harold, but make sure your legal team reads the contracts first." That landed. Harold blinked, because deep down, he knew. I didn't build my empire on company time. I had stayed up past midnight working vendor spreadsheets on my own computer, taken calls during vacations, maintained contacts in my personal email. The supplier list, my list, was built from years of unpaid, unrecognized dedication, and it lived on a flash drive he didn't even know existed. "I'll see you in court," Harold snarled. He turned sharply and stalked back to the car. But behind him, another figure appeared in the parking lot, Darren. He looked pale, frantic. A phone clutched in one hand, his tie loose around his neck. He wasn't shouting like Harold. He was muttering. "We've got 3 stores down already. Yelp reviews exploding. Delivery routing's a mess. No backups, no answers, we're bleeding out." He didn't even look at me, just paced in frantic circles, typing furiously, mumbling numbers to himself like they were lifelines. Harold barked at him to get in the car. He didn't hear. I stood beside Jay and watched them. The 2 men who had laughed as they shoved me out. The men who told me to disappear, now unraveling in their own parking lot. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But something settled inside me like the quiet after a thunderclap. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't begged. I had walked. And their world had followed. It was strange how calm I felt. 3 days after I left Martin and Sons, I found myself seated in a corner booth of a local diner, surrounded by faces I hadn't expected to see again. At least, not this soon. Jay sat across from me, nursing a chipped mug of diner coffee. To my left was Lily from Regional Development, who had texted me the night I left with nothing but a heart emoji and a thumbs up. On my right, Miguel, the driver who had walked out with barely a word but had shown up to this meeting like he'd been waiting for it his whole life. There were 8 of us total, 8 people who had no idea what came next, but still showed up. I laid out the floor plans on the table like a blackjack dealer about to flip a royal flush. 3 locations, I said, keeping my voice steady. 2 in Columbus, 1 in Akron, all within 12 weeks of operational capacity. Lease agreements signed this morning. Lily leaned in, eyes wide. "You already signed them." "Liberty Bank doesn't just rent vaults," I said with a smile. "They finance ventures. I had the business plan ready by the time they opened." Jay let out a low whistle. "You didn't just fall. You jumped with a parachute already packed." I shrugged. "Sometimes you build it on the way down." I rolled out the supplier map next. Every name on the page was one I'd personally spoken to in the last 48 hours. Every one of them said yes. Not because I begged, not because I threatened, but because they trusted me. Because for 7 years, I picked up the phone at midnight when they needed routing changes. I fixed Harold's mistakes behind closed doors. I caught invoicing errors before they lost money. I wasn't just a point of contact. I was their person. "E-calling at Red Barn Markets," I said, tapping the logo sketch I'd scribbled in pencil that morning. It wasn't fancy, just a bold barn silhouette over crossed crates, but it felt right, familiar, grounded. Miguel chuckled. "Sounds like home." "It will be," I said. Lily leaned back, her expression shifting from curiosity to something more electric. "Claire, this is war." "No," I corrected. "This is freedom." Jay smirked. "Same thing sometimes." We laughed. For the first time in what felt like weeks, we really laughed, not the kind that tries to patch over hurt. The kind that comes when you realize you're building something bigger than vengeance. A movement. A choice. The waitress came by and refilled everyone's coffee. No one touched their menus. We were too wired on adrenaline and plans. "I've already hired a contractor for retrofitting the units," I continued. "The first shipments arrive Monday. all regional produce, half the price of what Martin and Sons was paying. And I'm matching employee pay scales with better hours. You're gonna need signage, Miguel said. Marketing, Lily added. Social media, press releases, let me handle it. Jay grinned. I can reroute the old logistics chain, create a new schedule with our best drivers. They were already slotting into place, like bones realigning after a fracture, and I was the spine, the part that still held shape. We don't need to be big right away, I said. Let them panic, let them patch holes. Let them sue, Jay added. They already did, I said, smiling. I'm due in court next week. Lily whistled. You ready for that? I nodded. More than I've ever been ready for anything. Because this wasn't just business, this was personal, but not petty, not anymore. I wasn't trying to burn Martin and Sons down. I was building something they never thought I could build, without their name, without their money, just me, and the people who chose me. The courtroom smelled like old wood, paper, and cold ambition. It was smaller than I expected. Tighter, more intimate. Like justice was something you had to sit shoulder to shoulder with to understand. I wore a gray suit. Clean lines, no frills. I didn't want to look wealthy. I wanted to look prepared. Because I was, across the aisle, Harold sat stiffly behind his legal team. Darren was beside him, pale and twitchy, tapping his foot against the tile like it owed him something. Their lawyers, 4 of them, were dressed like they wanted to win before they even spoke. Power ties, click pens, stacks of binders with aggressive post-it tabs me. I had one folder, and a flash drive, no theatrics, just facts. When the judge entered, the room shifted. The hum of whispers stopped. Even Harold folded his hands and forced his shoulders down. The clerk read the charge. Plaintiff, Martin and Sons Market Chain. Defendants, Claire Martin. Cause, theft of proprietary supplier database and intellectual property. Motion to block competitive use. The words echoed. The judge was a woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed but calm. Her nameplate read Hun. Deborah Wells. She looked between both sides, then leaned slightly forward. Plaintiff may begin. Harold's lead attorney, Mr. Treadwell, gray hair and alligator briefcase, stood like he was on stage. Your Honor, we are here because Ms. Martin, upon leaving Martin and Sons, absconded with our private supplier network, a system developed over a decade of strategic partnerships. She has used this confidential data to launch a competing business, threatening the foundation of a multi-generational company. He said it like I was a saboteur, like I'd set the building on fire. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. Your Honor, I said, I'm not here to argue a motion. I'm here to show proof. She nodded. Proceed. I pulled out a set of notarized documents, printed in triplicate, and handed them to the clerk. These are email chains, contracts, and supplier onboarding forms signed between 2016 and 2023. Each shows that I personally initiated, negotiated, and maintained these relationships. Many are linked to my private consulting account, which predated my executive title at Martin and Sons. The judge flipped through them with interest. Treadwell objected. That account was used during company hours on company systems. I lifted the flash drive. This is the original database, Your Honor. Time-stamped, geotagged, and built on a privately owned device. I've included metadata analysis and witness testimony from 5 suppliers confirming I initiated every agreement outside of formal board oversight. Jay was in the gallery, nodding slowly. I went on, voice clear. They never saw the list. They never asked where it came from. They used it, profited from it, but never claimed ownership until I left. Treadwell was flustered now. It's still internal data. No, I interrupted, gently but firmly. It was my data, maintained outside their network, built during off hours. They never paid for it, documented it, or even knew its scope. I turned to the judge. I built this from scratch. The courtroom was so quiet you could have heard the fluorescent lights buzzing. Judge Wells looked up. You have proof of that. I handed over the last piece, an affidavit signed by 2 former vendors, plus the vault access records from Liberty Bank showing when I stored the drive. The judge read them carefully, then leaned back. I'll need a recess to review, but... She looked directly at Harold. This does not appear to be company property. Not legally. Not ethically. Harold's jaw clenched. Darren's foot stopped tapping. For the first time, I saw panic in their eyes, and all I had done was tell the truth. The courtroom door opened with a soft creak when Judge Wells returned from recess. Everyone stood, everyone waited, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't holding my breath to be chosen. I wasn't hoping to be spared. I was standing in my truth, no longer asking permission. Judge Wells adjusted her glasses and looked around the room. "I've reviewed the evidence," she began, "and it is the opinion of this court that the database in question is not, legally or contractually, the property of Martin and Sons market chain." Silence. Thick, stunned silence. She continued, "The defendant has provided sufficient documentation proving personal authorship, private storage, and sole maintenance of the supplier database. Furthermore, no formal agreement exists between the plaintiff and the defendant that assigns this work as company-owned intellectual property." Treadwell stood abruptly. "Your Honor," she raised a hand, "you may file a separate appeal if you wish, but for now this case is dismissed, and Ms. Martin retains full ownership of her data." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My fingers curled around the edge of the defense table, not because I was afraid, because I felt the moment hit, years of invisibility gone in 5 sentences. I didn't look at Harold right away. I looked at Darren. His face was blank, like someone had hit pause on the inside. His phone was still in his hand, thumb frozen above the screen. He was trying to calculate the fallout, and he couldn't keep up. Then Harold rose slowly from his seat. He wasn't red-faced anymore. He looked old, tired, like he couldn't quite believe the empire he built on control had cracked under the quiet weight of one woman's patience. Our eyes met. For the first time, he didn't speak. He didn't offer a final jab or a snide remark or a call for security. He just sat back down. The fight had gone out of him. The judge dismissed the room. Jay caught up to me at the back door of the courthouse. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I am now." As we stepped outside, microphones immediately swarmed local reporters. A national food industry blog. A woman from the Columbus Business Journal with a voice recorder already rolling. They all spoke at once. MS. "Martin, was this revenge or justice? Are you launching a chain to compete with your father's? What's your response to the claims of sabotage?" I lifted a hand gently. They quieted. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't shout. I just said, "Justice doesn't scream, it builds." And with that, I walked past them, not into a sunset, not into a limo, just down the courthouse steps, binder in hand, freedom in my spine. Jay fell into step beside me, grinning like a man watching a miracle happen in real time. "You know," he said, "you could have made a speech, gone viral." "I don't need viral," I replied. He chuckled. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I just remembered who I was before they told me who to be." He nodded, and we kept walking toward a future we hadn't inherited but were choosing to build ourselves. A new name, a clean start, and a network they'd never own again. The ribbon was already cut, but people kept lining up like they were waiting for a concert. It wrapped around the corner of the building, down the sidewalk, even looped through the adjacent lot where the bakery used to be. Kids played tag between shopping carts while their parents took selfies near the bright red sign above our doors. Red Barn Markets, painted bold, clean, and unpretentious. We'd made it, and somehow it still didn't feel real. I stood just inside the front entrance, under the soft glow of warm Edison bulbs, watching our first wave of customers walk through, some curious, others already loyal from the press coverage and word of mouth. Many recognized me. Some just smiled politely and walked on. But the ones who mattered, they stopped. "You're the reason I switched," a man in a windbreaker told me as he passed. "They treated my wife like dirt at the old store. She's cashiering here now." First time I've seen her smile at work in years. A woman handed me a bouquet of daisies. "Thank you for hiring my nephew. He was out of work for months." I didn't cry. I just nodded, heart swollen. The produce section gleamed like a farmer's market on its best day. All regional. Fresh. Cheaper than what we used to charge at Martin and Sons, and we still paid better rates to the suppliers. Because when the middlemen aren't skimming to feed a boardroom, everyone eats better. I spotted Tara once across the road. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, hair pulled back, sunglasses on like she didn't want to be recognized. She didn't approach, didn't cause a scene, but her eyes lingered on the entrance, the sign, the steady wave of customers. Then quietly she slipped into a line for open interviews. I didn't wave. I didn't sneer. I just turned away. Inside, Lily was setting up the loyalty program kiosk. Miguel was checking our delivery intake with the precision of a surgeon. Jay, clipboard in hand, was making rounds with the floor managers everywhere I looked. Movement, growth, purpose. These weren't just former employees. These were builders, founders. And every one of them had bet on me when I had nothing to offer but conviction. Jay joined me near the front. You seeing this? I'm trying to believe it's real. He laughed. 9-minute checkout times, 3 restocks already on lettuce. Not bad for a soft opening. I grinned. Not bad at all. He nodded toward the parking lot. You sure you only want 3 stores? I looked at the crowd again, at the toddler squealing near the oranges, the elderly couple reading our handwritten labels, the teen who asked for a job app without making eye contact. I'm sure, I said. Let's get these right first. Jay smiled. Smart. Because I didn't want to grow fast, I wanted to grow right. Red Barn wasn't just a market, it was proof. Proof that loyalty still meant something. That transparency worked. That treating people like humans wasn't weakness. It was the only strength that ever truly lasted. Inside, the air smelled like fresh bread, just brewed coffee, and promise. And I, who once sat in a gray office building being told to disappear, now stood at the helm of something real, something I made, something no one could take away. 1 year later, Red Barn had 9 stores, 9, not franchised, not rushed, carefully opened, carefully nurtured. In Ohio and Pennsylvania, each store grew like a hand-planted garden, rooted in its neighborhood, built by its people, and grown by the choices we made daily. And today, the flagship store shimmered with string lights and soft music. Holiday party night. I stood near the center aisle, where we'd moved a few produce bins aside to make room for a buffet table and rows of folding chairs. Former employees milled about, some still wearing name tags from their shifts, others holding paper plates piled with pie and pulled pork sliders. No champagne, just hot cider and gratitude. The first winter had been hard, some vendors delayed. Some supplies came late, but no one quit, no one wavered. And when customers asked who we were, we told them the truth. We were the people who stayed up late tracking deliveries. The ones who picked up the phone when corporate wouldn't. We were the ones who remembered what it meant to serve, and didn't just say it in marketing emails. This wasn't just a rebound story. It was a blueprint. Jay tapped a spoon against a mug, signaling everyone's attention. His face was flushed from cider and wind, and his grin looked nearly permanent these days. Everyone, he called. Before we all get too sugared up to speak, Claire has something to say. Groans and laughter rippled through the crowd. I shook my head, chuckling. I didn't write a speech. Someone shouted, "That's never stopped you before." More laughter, but they quieted as I stepped forward, and suddenly the moment held a gentle stillness. I just wanted to say thank you, I began, my voice steady. Not just for tonight, but for every morning shift, every call during breakdowns, every time someone said, "We'll figure it out," and then did. I looked around. I started Red Barn because I was forced out of a place I thought would be mine forever. But what I didn't realize then was, I didn't lose a company, I lost an illusion. Heads nodded slowly. But what I found, what we built, is something real, something earned. I raised my cider. To loyalty earned, not inherited. Glasses clinked softly around the room. Then Lily, now head of regional expansion, stepped forward with a grin. And to Claire, the one we bet on when the boardroom said no. More cheers, more clinking. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. This was about building something that lasted. Something that lived beyond my anger, beyond my name. At the far end of the store, I saw a familiar figure wiping down a counter, Tara, quiet. Low profile, she'd applied under a different last name. I recognized her immediately. But I let the application process do what it does objectively. She worked. She showed up. She listened more than she spoke. She'd become ordinary. And somehow that was the most humbling twist of all. She had to learn what it meant to serve, not manipulate, not inherit, but contribute. And I didn't need to punish her. Life had already done what it does best. Level the ground. Jay appeared beside me again. "You ever think we'd be here?" I shook my head, smiling softly. "I never let myself think this far." He raised a brow. "What now?" I looked around at aisles filled with customers, team members laughing, and a future that didn't feel borrowed anymore. Now, I said, we just keep showing up. Because legacy isn't lightning. It's the choice you make every day when no one's watching. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just working a job. I was living a truth.